the world. Bear in mind, they still need 71% on this one, and that's big. It's a 2-for-1 deal. Better than a Happy Meal.
This week in the Overwatch League, Blizzard issues a series of fines, and after a second suspension, xQc is kicked from the Dallas Fuel. Two head coaches step down from their teams, the LA Gladiators have an amazing week, and the Florida Mayhem pick up their first win of Stage 2. We've got all the best highlights and the latest news from the past week.
Looking to really use in this next fight. Hydration. Technically, there's enough burst damage here on Barrage to kill some people, but Hoorae's going to be able to survive through most of it. No! Hydration catches him out despite the fact the Transcendence was in effect. The damage was there, and then a follow-up shot is beautiful. No! Surely! Oh my lord! Agapun just gets knocked off the map. It's so filthy. It's like Hydration and Asher are just trying to one-up each other.
Let's start with the recent wave of fines and the suspension that led to Dallas Fuel dropping xQc. So on Friday, Blizzard announced a wave of disciplinary action being taken against a number of players as well as a coach for various offences. First up, Dallas Fuel's Taimu was fined $1,000 for using anti-gay slurs on stream. Shortly before Blizzard announced these punishments, Taimu also posted an apology to his fans on Twitter. The LA Valiant Silk Thread received a $1,000 fine for account sharing, while the Houston Outlaws coach Tyrong received a formal warning for posting an offensive meme on social media. Tyrong's instant apology and charitable donation after the event was taken into account when determining the judgment. However, the harshest punishments went to xQc, who received a $4,000 fine as well as a 4-game suspension. Blizzard's reasons for this included repeated use of an emote in what they deemed to be a racially disparaging manner on the Overwatch League Twitch stream, as well as language used by xQc against Overwatch League casters and fellow players on his social media and his personal stream. Debate is still raging about the severity of xQc's punishment, and there is a good chance it's happening in the comments below this video, but regardless of whether it's fair or not, the second suspension in 2 months was enough for the Dallas Fuel to drop xQc from the team. Pro players, casters and xQc himself have all shared their reactions to the news. First, xQc's now former teammate Custer had this to share from the perspective of the Dallas Fuel.
The TLDR of it is the very end of that, where you can only have 12 players in a roster, and xQc is not reliable enough to be playing in a roster. We tried to play with him for Stage 1, then he got suspended. Fuck, okay. And then he comes in, we start playing with him, we start practicing with him really hard and really want him to be a part of the team, and then he gets himself suspended again. And it's like, how can you play with that as a team? If you can't build around a player, especially a main tank player who is very important to the roster, who has the potential to get suspended at a given notice. It doesn't make sense to have him on your roster. I really like Felix as a person.
Muma, who plays main tank for the Houston Outlaws and was previously impacted by xQc's behaviour and has been receiving threats from xQc's most vocal fans ever since, had this to say on the matter.
Yeah, I know he's released. I don't really care. If I didn't worry about him when he was in the league, I'm not going to worry about him when he's not in the league, you know? It's the least of my concerns.
Whatever you think's.
I don't think he's homophobic. I don't think he's racist. It's probably for the better for him that he's not in the league. So, he has a great stream. He's an entertaining person. I'm sure he will find happiness in whatever he chooses to do, and I hope that's the case. With that said, let's never mention the name again, because I don't care.
A number of members of the broadcast talent also shared their thoughts, with some expressing hopes for him to return. Reinforced suggested that perhaps he could join another team in the future. The LA Gladiators Fisher also shared a similar sentiment, but xQc had his own thoughts on the possibility of this happening.
So the league would have to manually approve my re-entry into another team. And I don't know about that, my dude. Listen, I think it's a little unlikely to be there.
Malik, who was directly impacted by xQc's latest suspension, and just like Muma before him, has been receiving a lot of abuse from xQc's most vocal fans, also posted about how he feels bad for xQc, but also that his fans have played a role in what happened. Super and Dante, players for the San Francisco Shock, also shared their condolences on Twitter. Many people also talked about how this could actually be good for xQc in the long run, as he can now focus on streaming, including Shore4 of the LA Gladiators. Lastly, xQc himself was streaming at the time of the announcement and shared some thoughts of his own and a request for his fans.
Chase down Mike and tell me he's a bad owner, and please don't chase the team thing, they're garbage, and that I don't deserve it or whatever. Please don't. spam DM the fuel and be mad about it, dude. Please don't send people fucking death threats again to people, I guess. And try to be as reasonable as possible.
xQc being released by Dallas almost seemed inevitable after the most recent suspension. Unfortunately, this is just the latest in a long line of problems for the fuel. Not all of them related to xQc, but he's certainly been involved in many of them. Interestingly, Dallas do have a new main tank player and Winston specialist joining the team, as OGE was announced a few days ago. Either this was incredibly coincidental, or more likely, the writing has been on the wall for xQc's release for a while now. What Dallas needs is a stable, reliable roster to start to build up from, and to start forging some real coordination between this team. Hopefully they will now have that opportunity. It's just a shame that it took them half the season to get there. Perhaps OGE comes in and fixes their problems, maybe Taimu starts to find more success as Winston, or perhaps the meta shifts to favour Coco and Reinhardt. We'll have to wait and see to be sure, but the effect of xQc being released will have an impact on the team going forward. We'll just have to hope it's a positive one. In other news, the Shanghai Dragons and London Spitfire have both parted ways with their head coaches this week. U4, the coach of the Dragons, has been a controversial figure for some time and was fined in January for approaching contracted players without permission, as well as being found to have been account sharing. There have also been questions raised about his coaching style, including the long training hours for the team, reportedly practicing from 10:30 AM until midnight, only breaking for meals. He's clearly been unable to get Shanghai a win, so his removal and the introduction of their new players in the near future will hopefully be enough to help this team sort things out. More shocking, however, was the departure of Bishop from the London Spitfire. London have obviously been doing very well as Stage 1 champions and remaining one of the top teams in Stage 2. However, rumours are that his departure was at least in part due to the request of the players. A new coaching structure is set to be announced for the Spitfire in the future, and it will be interesting to see what impact this has on the team. Will it drive them to new heights, or will it come back to bite them in Stage 3? We will have to wait and see, but for now, let's get into the action on stage. The LA Gladiators had a huge week, taking away 2 victories with dominant scorelines. Their second win of the week over the London Spitfire was huge, as it put the Gladiators in a position to reach Stage 2 playoffs, and beating the Valiant in the second Battle for LA is also a massive morale boost. This team have gone from strength to strength in Stage 2, and they have managed to integrate Fisher incredibly quickly, and it's paying off as his amazing tank play is allowing their DPS to shine through.
Live hydration with the Dragon Blade, goes in, cuts out Karif, looking for more. Has to watch out for that self-destruct, but he won't let Envy remech again. Virgo, nice reflect.
Gets another one, and there's another one. 4K, 4 hydration.
The Seoul Dynasty also came away with another 2 wins this week to keep themselves at the top. It'll be interesting to see how they cope next week as they take on both London and New York back to back.
Lucio's able to get back in the mix. Blossom incoming, takes down 3!
The Philadelphia Fusion dropped both of their games against tough competition of New York and Seoul, but fans should still be proud of their team as they gave both of these top teams a run for their money, and the Fusion continue to improve.
Really going after the tank play there, but now there is a small advantage for Philadelphia. They've taken 1, now they've taken 2 down. It is a 6v4 on the first point, but now Toby being flooded back into it. Gotta watch your head.
The Shanghai Dragons had another tough week, but managed to take a map off Seoul, which was nice to see. It will be interesting to see what happens when the new players arrive in time for Stage 3, and if they can finally get a win.
At that point, he can't do it, and Shanghai will take King's Row.
Boston were one of the teams to crush the Dragons, but in turn they got picked apart by the London Spitfire. Boston kept things interesting throughout the game and certainly posed a threat of taking a map or 2, but in the end it was London coming away with the victory.
Their intro site giving them all the information on the positioning of the Shanghai defense.
And their striker just styling already. Big stick there to kick things off. Zushu goes charging into the backline, hoping to get lucky.
Speaking of London, this week they once again tried to split their roster into 2, with each side focusing on a different game. But just like in week 1, this came back to bite them as the GC Busan half of the team struggled in their match against the Gladiators before being replaced at halftime with their A team. However, this still wasn't enough to get them the win. It's a great idea on paper, but right now it's not yielding results.
Flight point was the call. Now the main in on. Shaz is going to get his barrier up, but there's not much he can do against the Death Blossom there. Still in overtime, of course. The Spitfire, though, have come up with a formula right at the final moments.
The Houston Outlaws' losing streak continued as they fell to the LA Valiant, and then things looked bad against the Mayhem, but the Houston team managed to pull things back with a reverse sweep. They will be hoping that this was enough to break the curse as they take on the LA Gladiators and the Shock next week.
There we go, sure enough, it is going to be... Oh, what a shot from Linkser.
The Valiant had a week that confused many fans as they lost 4-0 against the Gladiators before beating the Outlaws by the same scoreline. So to briefly explain what happened here was that the Gladiators played a very aggressive style and the Valiant couldn't keep up. But against the more passive Outlaws, the Valiant were able to dictate the pace more and control the game. It's a rock, paper, scissors kind of situation.
He notices that the Valiant have sort of backed up a little bit. Oh! Hey Jake, it's 4 AM and Soon's in your house with a Tracer. What are you going to do now? Nice.
The San Francisco Shock had another up and down week, first taking a win over the Dallas Fuel, but then later falling against the mighty New York Excel, who looked great throughout the game.
Dude, listen to this. I just checked over at the stats. Dante, 27 limbs, 19 final blows, 0 deaths in that first half.
Speaking of New York, they finished up the week with 2 wins, putting them into a more solid second place position in the standings. With their eyes set on Seoul next week, this could be their opportunity to take the first place seed once again, just in time for the Stage 2 playoffs.
But they want to win a fight right here. Libero, though, he can't get the translocator off in time. Goodbye, Fraggy, though. Jonak, he's got the nano boost, and now he's going crazy. Neptuno down as well. Pops a Transcendence. Might as well be waving goodbye to the rest of Philadelphia Fusion here.
Chonak, the battle mech.
Dallas had another rough week with the most recent drama hanging over them as they fell against the Shock on day 1. However, their biggest loss was against the Florida Mayhem, who pulled off the reverse sweep, making Dallas the only team to lose to the Mayhem in Stage 2 and the only team other than the Dragons to lose to them overall.
To reach them actually, they all stay alive and AKM has shifted even further back and now it's open season. Logic's down, AKM in a position to pick Zupe off, he realises he's under scrutiny. Zupe steps towards the side, Tvik finds Mickey and now AKM drops down just to add some semi-automatic fire to the mix. Easy chip damage on Manaton's mech to knock him out of it, resurrect there. Mickey gonna be back in his own mech now. Huge advantage for the Dallas Fuel in this fight. Zephyrsize low, one shot was all it would have taken for AKM and he'll gladly take it.
Lastly, Florida had a huge week. They looked good against the Outlaws, winning their first 2 games, but the Houston team hit back, taking the series in a reverse sweep. But at this point, Mayhem's potential became more clear, and when they set their eyes on the Dallas Fuel, they were able to pull off their own reverse sweep to claim their first win of Stage 2 and their second of the season.
They've done it! The Florida Mayhem is their second win of the season! They now go to 2-14 for the Dallas Fuel. What a marathon match!
I had a few choices for the best match of the week. Gladiators beating London was a great storyline, Houston's reverse sweep was exciting if you're a fan of the Outlaws, but I think I have to give it to the Florida Mayhem versus the Dallas Fuel. Things started off rough for the Mayhem as they lost the first 2 games, however, throughout them they often had big moments from individual players.
Seen it many times before. We've also seen this one, Matt. There's a Transcendence there. Tvik, again, knows he can still get kills despite that. He doesn't overcommit, though. We found Mickey after he gets desuited there. Can he find Chips? Oh! It was a Helix rocket deflected from Rascal back into Chips.
After halftime, everything was on the line for the Mayhem, and they came up huge on King's Row with a full hold as things started to click into place, and Logix in particular started to settle in and connect on some great shots.
Really gives new meaning to the monkey on your back, and then Harry Hook. Straight down to Logix. Yeah, he knows we're watching. Alright, big fella.
Gibraltar was hard fought on Mayhem's attack rounds as they had to fight for every inch, but they still managed to complete the map.
Logix uses grappling hook to get forward and away from Taimu, who just has to circle back and help the rest of the Dallas Fuel stall now.
The kills.
That's rough.
Still
That's a big
going,
pulse bomb.
Yeah, it's the kills still going in favor of the Mayhem. Just going
there
to
it is.
Skull alive, and that'll be it.
When it was the Fuel's turn to attack, they opened up great on the first and second points, thanks in no small part to AKM's Widowmaker. They came incredibly close to finishing the map, but as Florida stalled it out, they also managed to start getting some kills, and as a result, take the map, with Dallas just inches away from the final checkpoint.
But who's on the payload for the Dallas Fuel? It's Chips, but he wasn't there! It's a map 5!
How did Tvik stay alive for so
Map 5, ladies and gentlemen, that's what we wanted, it's what we were hoping for, and it's what we're going to get.
At 2 games each we went to Ilios, and Florida started to play out of their minds. Tvik and Logix in particular helped to claim Florida the first round.
A big salute! Rascal takes down Tvik from extremely long range, but it won't be enough. We're on the cusp here. The Florida Mayhem taking their second win of the Overwatch League, not just the stage, the season.
Round 2 and Logix switches to Widowmaker to get the picks they need to claim the point. Some back and forth throughout the round keeps things interesting, but in the end it's Florida who pulls it off and gets themselves their second win of the season.
He recalls out, goes again, but he's low. Surely that's it, surely it's over. Tvik is stalling in the back line and they've done it! The Florida Mayhem is their second win of the season! for the Dallas Fuel. What a marathon match. So many changes up in composition and in roster. But the Mayhem survived it, and they've doubled their winning total now for the season.
And you just see Swoosh just jump up, so happy here.
This was great for Florida. A lot of people focused on Dallas not playing well, which was certainly a factor, but you can't take anything away from Florida, who played a great game. Hopefully this is a sign of things to come from this team, with their new signings and coach coming on board. Speaking of signings, we've had 2 new ones confirmed this week, including the London Spitfire picking up the main tank player TIZI. He will most likely be a backup player as Gesture continues to work wonders for the team on stage. He stated himself in the press release that he intends to learn from Gesture to become a better player. More interesting, however, is OGE joining the Dallas Fuel. As a main tank player, the timing here could be quite fortunate, with xQc now gone from the team. It remains to be seen if he'll be able to positively impact Dallas. He's never been a standout player, but right now, an experienced main tank with the right attitude that can gel with the rest of the team might be enough to save Dallas as they go into Stage 3. Dallas Fuel also seem to be suggesting in their press release that they will be filling xQc's spot in the coming weeks. In theory, this should be with an off-tank or perhaps a support player, but we will have to wait and see. Lastly, Zappis is now in the US, so will be available to play for the Mayhem going forward, and the Shanghai Dragons revealed that their new players are set to arrive in the US before the end of the month, barring any complications.
Reinforcements have arrived. This is amazing. Lovely.
Man.
In the overall standings, the only major shift this week was the Shock moving up a spot as the Fuel dropped back down into 10th place, but both of these teams are only separated by a couple of map wins. In the Stage 2 standings, the Dynasty still sit at the top, but the biggest jump came from the Gladiators, moving from 6th place up to 3rd. We can now start to look at the Stage 2 playoffs. Seoul's unbeaten record will go a long way into keeping them in the top 3. If they can get a win over either Spitfire or New York next week, they will almost certainly be in the playoffs. New York also separated themselves from the pack this week, taking a 5-1 record, leaving the Gladiators, Spitfire and Valiant all at 4-2. Looking forward to next week, we have New York vs Seoul on day 1 in one of the most important games of this stage so far. On day 2, the Outlaws vs the Gladiators will be exciting as we get to see if the LA team can continue their momentum from this week into next. Day 3 sees the Gladiators in action again, this time against the Florida Mayhem. Boston vs Valiant could also be interesting, depending on how aggressive Boston are willing to play. On day 4, things wrap up with a Battle of the Titans between Seoul and London in another important game that will likely have an impact on which of these teams make the playoffs. Which matches are you most excited about for next week? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe, and as always, this is James for Cass, saying thanks for watching and enjoy the game.